Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm now sitting in a fully working Dodge weapons carrier, fingers crossed. As you saw in my last video, I was doing work on the engine and did a first engine run and everything seemed to be okay. It wasn't quite perfect, but you'll see that in this video. The day after I gave the Dodge its first engine run, I re-torqued the cylinder heads to start the day. After that, I started the Dodge up and drove it out of the garage. I needed the space around it to work to carry the hood from the back of the Dodge to fit it over the engine. With the hood fitted, I was ready for a test drive. I let the engine warm up on the drive first, so that I would have a quicker indication of whether the engine was getting hot or not once it started driving. I took the Dodge for a 7-mile drive, not too far from home, so that if I had any problems I should be able to get back okay before anything overheated too badly. There were two things I was testing on the drive. Firstly, I was monitoring the new cylinder head gasket for any signs of leaking. I'd had the cylinder head skimmed before refitting, and this was the first time I'd used a copper composite gasket. The second thing to test was whether the Dodge was still overheating or not. The route I drove had a mix of fast and slower roads. I say fast, but due to the rev limiter on the Dodge, I can only do 40 miles an hour anyway. Everything looked okay to start with no problems from the cylinder head, but as the drive continued, the temperature began to creep up. That was a sign to head back home and check things over further. By the time I got back, the temperature was at 185 Fahrenheit. That's the top end of the normal operating temperature, but I'd only expect that on a long run on a summer's day, not on a short autumn drive. The Dodge was running okay, and while it was in pieces, the engine could be turned over by hand without any friction. I'd checked and made secure the water transfer tube inside the engine block, and the water pump was fine too. While running on the drive, there was a noticeable drop in temperature between the radiator inlet pipe and the outlet, so the radiator was cooling, just not well enough when the engine was under driving loads. From the start of the project, I'd planned on putting a flush through the engine and radiator once it was back together. I'd washed out the radiator with a hose while it was removed from the Dodge, and the water flowed out fairly cleanly, and it appeared without any restrictions. So on the evening of the test drive, I visited a local Halfords and bought the only 2 bottles of Radiator Flush they had. For the quantity of coolant in the Dodge, I needed 2 bottles. But I also went out the following morning and bought another bottle, again the only one in a different store, to do a second flush. The next morning the cylinder head was torqued up once again, the coolant was drained and the flush added. The engine needed to be at normal running temperature for the flush to do its thing, so I started the Dodge up and pulled it out onto the drive again. To help dislodge any silt in the radiator, in addition to the flush, I felt that some agitation would help. The easiest way I could think of doing that was with a 1/4 sheet orbital sander and a block of wood. The wood was small enough to pass between the bars of the radiator grill and was held against the front of the radiator. The sander was then lightly pressed onto the back of the wood so that the vibration from the sander would pass through the wood and into the radiator. After this, I used my jet washer to spray into the front of the radiator to make sure that it wasn't clogged, preventing cooling air from passing through the tubes. It was all finished by noon. I then needed to put the Dodge away as I had some dad taxi driving to do for my daughter. I was back home late afternoon, so decided to take the Dodge out for a run to help to get the flush flowing at a faster rate through the engine and radiator. It was just a 5-mile trip after I'd already got the engine up to normal temperature on the driveway. At this point I still didn't have the thermostat fitted, as I wanted to know whether the engine was getting hot or cooling properly without having to worry about whether the thermostat was working or not. For the whole trip, the temperature stayed between 145 to 155 degrees Fahrenheit and was seen to drop at various points where the engine was under less load. This was a very good sign. I brought the Dodge back home and put it away again to cool down. The next morning the Dodge was rolled out once more and the radiator drain plug pulled to rinse the flush out. As you can see from the video, it was fairly brown, despite being clean when washing the radiator with the garden hose. I also removed the bleed screw in the thermostat housing so I could spray the hose into the water pump in the engine block to rinse that out too. Eventually I was getting clear water out of the drain plug. I then added the third bottle of flush to the system and ran the engine back up to temperature and then left that to cool before draining it once more. Once that was done, the thermostat was tested in a pan of hot water one final time to check its operation, and then it was refitted to the engine. The coolant was filled again, hopefully for the last time. After lunch, around mid-afternoon, the Dodge was started up for a test drive number 3. My daughter came along and did some video from the back of the truck. After test drive number 2 with the flush in, I was more confident of the cooling. As a result, this trip was planned to be longer, taking in both fast and slow roads plus some hills. After starting out more locally, the temperature was looking stable. The thermostat is stamped with 161 degrees Fahrenheit, and the temperature was hovering from just under to just over the 160 degree mark on the gauge. With things looking good, I ventured a bit further from home on a faster road with some more hills. We ended up at the mining memorial that I'd visited with the Chiefs back in May. Everything was still looking good, but with the fuel gauge bouncing off the 0 mark, we turned around and set off for home again. The 5 gallons of fuel that I bought just before the first test drive must have been mostly used by this time. We stopped a couple of times for pictures on the road that we call Sunset Lane. We named it this after a Jeep photo shoot there not long after we moved to Durham. By the time we got home, the temperature was reading just over 160 Fahrenheit, and by the time I'd put the Dodge back in the garage, it had dropped to 150. The drive ended up being 13 miles long, with the temperature very stable across the whole drive. I was happy that I seemed to have finally got over the overheating problem. I'll obviously be keeping a close eye on everything for the next few trips out, but for now, and hopefully for some time, I'm back up to all 3 vehicles being serviceable again. While I don't have any more 1940s events this year, I like to try and keep the vehicles being used over the winter. The only time I don't go out is if it's been snowing and the roads have been freshly salted with road grit. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.